Looking at our world from a theological perspective. This is the Theology Central Podcast, making theology central.
Welcome, everyone. It is Thursday, November the 18th, 2021. It is currently 5:33 p.m. Central Time, and I'm coming to you live from Ovalo, Texas. I'm here in the empty sanctuary of Victory Baptist Church. And earlier today, I sent a message out to everyone in my church, or everyone who's a part of our Discord channel. I sent a message to everyone on the Discord channel, and I told them that, hey, guys, we now are a part of a trendy church. Our church is a part of a trend. We are now a trendy church. Now, I said it in a very joking, sarcastic way, but the reason I was telling all the members of Victory Baptist Church who are on the Discord channel, the reason I was telling them this is because of a news article that seems to think that the future of the church is the mini-church. You heard that right. The future of the church is the mini-church. Now, we have to be very careful here, okay? Because I've been a Christian for a long time, and I don't know how many different times I've been told, this is the future of the church. The church will look like this is the future of the church. And a lot of times, those predictions, well, either they were very short, they didn't last very long, right? They had a very short period of time where they seem to even be possibly true, but maybe there was a trend that developed and then boom, it went away relatively quick and the church veered in a different direction. But I've heard a lot of times, this is what the church is going to do. This is what the church is going to be. And it doesn't always play itself out. So I'm not going to say that this is going to be 100% accurate, but I do believe it is something to consider because I believe as Christians, we need to constantly be trying to figure out not only where the church is right now, but where is it going? Is it going in the right direction? Is it going in the wrong direction? What do we need to do? What do we need to prepare for? How should we be thinking? So I found this article somewhat interesting. So I'm just going to share a little bit of it, present the idea to you. You can let me know if you agree or disagree. But this is from an article that was published November the 17th at 2:30 p.m. So it was published yesterday. Now, at the photograph at the top is of a church, and there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people in the sanctuary, and there's one person standing up on the platform. Now, on one hand, when I look at this, okay, that's very few people in this building, but it's relatively a large-looking church. Definitely much larger than the building I'm currently sitting here in the middle of Ovalo, Texas. I mean, they've got 2 large screens. They've got speakers hanging from the ceiling. This looks like a relatively large church, or at least, again, large and nicer than any, well, I've only been a pastor of one church. So of any church, well, actually, it's probably, well, I think the last church I attended when I was in Nebraska, well, obviously when I was a Lutheran, I was in the one in Winters was very large. So I've been a part of large churches, but most of the time, I guess the majority of time, I think I guess they've all been bigger than this. But yeah, I'm a pastor of a very, 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 very small church in the middle of nowhere, Texas. So it's a very few people, but it's a larger building. So my question would be, I wonder how they could have such a nice building with so few people. But so that's the photograph. I know you don't care about the photograph, but that's the photograph. And then right under that, it says this: why the mini-church is the latest trend in American religion. So the mini-church is the latest trend. Well, finally, I'm a pastor of a church that now has caught up with the trend. Or should I say that the rest of the churches caught up with us, because we were the mini church before many churches were trending. So I guess everyone's like, you know what? We want to be like Victory Baptist Church in the middle of nowhere, Texas. That's what we want to be like them. And I don't think that's what's happening. But why do they say this is the future? Or this is the latest trend, I should say. Well, let's see what they have to say. The Reverend Derek Miller has seen the future of the church in America, and it is small. On a Sunday morning in early November, Miller, guitar in hand, stepped up to the microphone at Cornerstone Church of Spring Green, Wisconsin, and began singing the familiar Charles Wesley hymn, "Oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing." A handful of people scattered in the sanctuary sang along, including a church elder in the front row next to a pair of young kids tapping on tambourines. By the time all the latecomers had arrived, there were 12 people in the congregation. Now, let me stop right here. Before we even move any further in this, when some people see a church with only 12 people, 10 people, whatever the number is, they immediately, and I know they would say they would never do this, but there's a part of them that dismisses it as insignificant, doesn't matter. Why are these people even here? Close the door. You're wasting your time. Everyone just goes somewhere else. It's pathetic. God is not moving. Now, they may not say it's pathetic, but they're basically saying, hey, it's a waste of time. God is not moving there. It's dead. Move on. It's dead. Move on. Now, I just want to make it very clear that when people say that, I sometimes get a little bothered, because when Jesus' earthly ministry was basically concluded, how many people were actually left, right? I mean, really. I mean, all the multitudes that followed him quickly abandoned him at some point. Then the crowd was chanting, "Crucify him." And then you had one disciple completely betray him and kill himself. The other one denied him 3 times, and then they all scattered, right? So you really look at it, they would have been looking at Jesus' ministry going, man, God is not moving in your ministry. You are pathetic. You are a loser. Now, they may not say those such harsh words, but that's really the attitude. They walk in and see a small church and like, ooh, it doesn't feel. Now, if they walk in and see a big church, ooh, God must be doing something here. There's no way to get around it. Americans they don't want to be a part of something that could reflect negatively on them. Being a part of a big church, a beautiful looking building with lots of people, make it look like that they've chosen the winning team, something that's influential, something that's powerful, something that doesn't reflect on them. But going into a little broken down building can make you feel like weird, awkward. You don't really want people to know you go to that church. You're embarrassed by it. There's just something built into us. And we have to ask ourselves a question. When we start feeling that way, then are we going to church to really learn and worship God and to be discipled? Are we going and somehow to make it, is it about us or is it about God? If it's about you and how you want to be viewed, that's bad. And trust me, as a pastor, pastors are very sensitive to this. If someone asks them, how's your church doing? They've got to, we're doing great, brother. We're doing great. We've had growth. We've had this. They've got to start throwing out everything that's going on. They don't talk about, they immediately start talking about numbers and services and ministries. And they've got to, because their identity is attached to that. And that's a danger. When your identity is attached to numbers and what's supposedly, I'm going to call it worldly success, then ministry has become something that it shouldn't be. And I look, you can say, well, see, you've got it figured out because you're a pastor of a little church in the middle of nowhere. You don't have any of that success. Yeah, but I'm just as vulnerable to the temptation of wanting it. All right? Trust me. All right? So I just think that there's a lot to say here. 12 people in the congregation, many people would have completely just dismissed them. Now, it says things used to be different. 5 years ago, when the church was at its height, as many as 100 people would show up for Sunday service. But the 2020 election, the racial reckoning after the death of George Floyd, and COVID-19 have taken their toll. On a good day, if everyone shows up, there might be 30 people. Now, again, a lot of people go, you went from 100 down to 30? You're done. You're finished. Quit. give up. They're not doing anything. God's not moving. You're basically wasting your time. And I understand that there's a tendency to view that. Even though we claim we don't measure success in the church based off how many people are listening or how many people are showing up. We say that, but everything indicates that's how people think and that's how people feel. All right? Services are often a one-man show. On this Sunday, Miller led the singing, preached the sermon, and even handled the video for the live stream of the service, moving the camera closer to the pulpit and greeting people online before preaching. And he wrote the song the congregation sang during the communion. Well, I mean, obviously, if you're a small church, you're basically a one-man show. I mean, obviously, you preach the sermon. I mean, I sometimes I'm shocked when people are like, wait a minute. You teach Sunday school, and you preach Sunday morning, and you preach Sunday night, and you preach Wednesday, and you do 1,000 episodes a year for your podcast. And I'm always like, yeah, okay. Was someone else supposed? Like, first of all, I wouldn't want anybody else to do it in the sense that I want to be preaching and I want to be teaching. I don't know. When pastors are like, I just get burned out. I don't understand how I can't get burned. I get burned out that I don't have enough time to preach and teach and talk and share and discuss and question and think about all the things that I want to talk and discuss and preach and teach on. That's my frustration is I have too much I want to do and not enough time to do it. Even with 24 hours in a day, I can't pull it all off. But a lot of people I've even heard pastors saying I can't do Sunday school and Sunday morning. I just can't do that. Or I can't do Sunday morning and Sunday night. It's just too much. And I'm like, I've always thought, how is it too much? I don't understand that. I don't get it because I'm always reading and always studying. I got a notebook right here, a brand new notebook that someone just purchased me. It's this beautiful brown leather bound with a leather strap that goes around it. It's a beautiful looking notebook. And I've only had it, 48 hours maybe. And I've probably already filled it up halfway with just devotional thoughts, Bible study, theological questions, just write. And so at any point I could grab that at any time, like boom, and I could take it and I could turn it in probably to an hour podcast, an hour sermon without much work. I'd probably have to do a little modification here or there, but I could probably be ready to go and get an hour out of anything I have in that notebook at any time. And that has nothing to do with me being better than anybody else. It just demonstrates that if you're hungry and passionate about something, you shouldn't have a lot of problem doing it. So I know a lot of articles it's almost shocked that one man can do that, and it's like, well, it can be. I don't know. So, all right, here we go. It says, running over, I'm grateful for your sacrifice. He's saying in a cheerful baritone, running over, pour your blessings through my life. Cornerstone is part of the fastest growing group of congregations in America, the Minichurch. The Minichurch is now the fastest growing group of congregations. I know that sounds a little like, wait, what? So the fastest growing is the smallest? That seems to not make sense. It seems to be contradictory, but that's what they're saying. According to the recent release Faith Communities Today study, half of the congregations in the United States have 65 people or fewer, while 2/3 of congregations have fewer than 100. So, wow, that is a declining number of people in churches. Churches are getting smaller and smaller. In other words, there are more and more churches that are getting smaller and smaller. And a lot of reason is because people are not attending. And again, I believe the COVID pandemic had a devastating consequence on this. A lot of people just didn't come back. A lot of people like, nope, done, not coming back. And, well, we'll talk about that in a minute right here. It says that's a marked change from 2 decades earlier when the 2000 Faith Community Today's survey found the median congregation had 137 people and fewer than half of the congregations had fewer than 100 people. Shrinking attendance figures coupled with an increase in the number and percent of small congregations obviously indicates that a good many congregations are not growing. The study's authors found, indeed, the median rate of change between 2015 and 2020 was a negative 7%, meaning half of all congregations declined in attendance by at least 7%. While most congregations are small, however, most worshipers attend a large congregation. Another prominent report, the National Congregation Study, found that while the average congregation is small, about 70 people, the majority of churchgoers are worshiping in congregations of about 400 people. The report reflects the reality that religious Americans are being sorted into two kinds of churches, megachurches and mini-churches. Megachurches and mini-churches, that's the two kinds of churches that are out there, mega and mini, all right? Among the worshipers at Cornerstone that Sunday was Lisa McDougall, a longtime friend of Miller and his wife, Deb McDougall. Deb McDougall said she appreciates being a part of a small congregation where relationships matter more than the spectacle of a Sunday morning. It's like a house church in a really nice setting or a small group. She said, I'm not interested in a large congregation, but please note, it's like a house church in a really nice setting. Yeah, because it looks like they have a very nice building, right? So how does it work for churches that don't have nice buildings? I don't know. That's something we could talk about. Ryan Burge, assistant professor of sociology at Eastern Illinois University, knows about the challenge of small churches firsthand. For about a decade and a half, he's been pastor of First Baptist Church in Mount Vernon, Illinois, a small American Baptist congregation, a job he first started while a grad student. Small church pastors can be often under tremendous pressure, said Burge. They are often the only person keeping things running, and it's difficult to take time off because there's no one else to preach or lead services. And if they leave, what will happen to the church? Still, even among small churches, there are differences. With 50 or 60 people there's a buffer between you and the abyss, he said. When you go to 10 to 15 people, there is no buffer. Now, let me stop right here. There is a lot of truth to this. When you're a pastor of a small church, yeah, number one, you tend to be, not always, but I think in most cases, you tend to be a bivocational pastor. So that means you have a full-time job, and I don't care what size the church is. If you care about ministry, you're trying to produce content, you're trying to make sure your sermons are good, you're working. That's basically full-time. So you're a full-time pastor. In many cases, you have a full-time job. That's 2 full-time jobs. You have 2 full-time jobs, and the people still demand that you do this and 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 this, and they don't care how much they take from you. They don't care how much you're destroyed because they're usually not there to pick up the pieces. And when things go horribly wrong, then they just point the finger at you and go, how dare you? And never, ever bother to go, wait, what could we have done a little bit better? And I'm not saying pastors should ever use that as an excuse, but I'm just saying that being bivocational, where you're working basically 2, sometimes feels like 3 full-time jobs, has a profound negative impact on your family and on your mental health and on everything. And I was a bivocational pastor for a very long time. Military, that's not a traditional work week. I mean, sometimes we're in a military exercise. There was times I worked overnight, like in a military exercise. I worked all night, military exercise, and then come to church Sunday morning and preach, so that I could go back Sunday night to be back in the military exercise. So basically almost going 2 days without sleep. Now, I'm pretty good at going without sleep, but it's still a lot of pressure. And a lot of times nobody ever took into consideration the negative consequences all of that produces. It's kind of like they just expect you to be there. Now, I wanted to be here, but it's still a lot of pressure. I'm trying to give a balanced view here. That bivocational thing is difficult. Number 2, yeah, in many cases, you're not there. There's no church service. You got to be there. Now, I love the fact that I get to preach and teach at everything. I do. But sometimes you need, like, hey, if I take a week off, if I take a Sunday off, can someone be there? And in many cases, no one is going to be there. And it can be very frustrating because you're in a very small church, so you know when someone doesn't show up. Like, it's not like a big church, so you know when someone doesn't show up, or you know when 2 families don't show up. Well, the expectation is that you show up, but if they don't want to show up, they don't. And that can, if you've got to be very careful as a pastor, that can create a sense of bitterness and frustration. You're like, so, okay, you don't have to show up, but I do. Got it. Got to make sure I understand how this works. Now, in some cases, they may say, well, we don't even care if you show up, and which then is a bad sign as well. So there's a lot of difficulties. The bivocational, the really, it's just you, and it's hard in some cases to even be able to take any time off, that it can become a source of frustration because you have to be there, and you know when other people are not, and it can be like, well, wait a minute, why am I here? And it can become a source of great frustration. There's a lot of pressures there. And then here's the big one, financial pressures. Look, people don't give. I mean, in a small church, everyone, if you lose anybody, it's economically devastating. Like, I am shocked. I mean, the main reason that I'm even able at this point not to be bivocational again is because the church has still been able to maintain my house payment. The minute they can't do that, I go back to bivocational. I know this. Theology Central podcast goes bye-bye because I cannot do that ever again, being bivocational, because I used to be bivocational, basically a full-time job in the military, full-time pastor, and I was a full-time podcaster. And of course, I don't charge for my podcast. So I was like I basically had 3 full-time jobs. And I absolutely hurt my family. I hurt myself. I hurt my church. I hurt the name of Christ. It was just devastating. It was absolutely, I was an idiot I thought I was trying to do the right thing, but it was bad. So that's like, there's such thin margin there. It's a thin margin. Like, your only choice is either to start, like, every time you do a podcast episode, hey guys, I need you to offer some money because we got to maintain the ministry here in the church. But you don't want to do that. But you know that you're in thin margin, very thin margin right there, very thin. For example, very discouraging. Yesterday, I got an email from our podcast hosting site, right? Spreaker. Now, I've sent them a message. I don't think they ever responded today. I'm hoping they will respond. They may not respond. But I was hoping to see if we could get some kind of a discount because they raised the prices. Well, now, for us to be on Spreaker is $120 a month. Now, we need to be on Spreaker. One, that Spreaker allows us to do live streaming for our church. Obviously, all of our podcasts are connected to it. To try to move everything would be just absolutely just such. I mean, we've built what we've got. We've reached the level of success. We would destroy that by trying to move everything. So we cannot do that. So we've got to stay where we are. But that's a lot of money. That's $120 every 30 days. Just to be on Spreaker. That doesn't even count anything else that we're trying to do. That doesn't count our pod pages. That doesn't count SoundCloud. That doesn't count anything else that we're trying to do. That's a lot of money. Now, and of course, we have to have, to be able to pull all that off, we have to have high-speed internet, right? We can't. I couldn't be live on the air out here in the middle of nowhere without high-speed internet. So you start adding that up, that's becomes a lot of money. So, yeah, you when you're in a small church, there's a lot of pressure, and there's thin margins. So I have never had to really worry about money. I mean, one, because I didn't take any pay for the longest, and then the church started making my house payment. But I worry about my house payment. I do. I wish if my house was paid off, the church would be, we wouldn't have anything to worry about. I mean, you know, if I could pay off if I could have $100,000 to pay off my house payment, right? Then I could be done. You know, $100,000, and I would be done, and that would be great. The church would not have any financial problems. No, would have no issues. Everything would be great. But it's just right there on the edge, you know. So that creates a lot of problems. So the mini church, there are a lot of pressures built into it. There are a lot of pressures. And these pressures lead to the mini church not almost adopting a mini church mindset. Here's the thing. The church can be small, but I don't think the thinking should ever be small. We may be small, but because of technology, we should not think small. I will never be able to reach as many people as mega churches may be able to be. But you know what I can do? I can turn on the microphone and do everything I can to get our preaching, our teaching, and ministry out to as many people in the world. I can do that. In other words, we may be small, but we don't have to think small. We don't have to say, well, look, there's only a few people here. Yeah, but there are thousands and thousands and thousands listening to us online. We will continue to minister to as many people as possible so that even though our ministry may be small, the impact may be larger. We can still have a larger impact. Sometimes many churches, because of those financial considerations, have to just say, well, we really can't try that. We really can't do that. That costs too much money. We can't do that. We can't do that. We can't do that. And so you just kind of disintegrate into a little small group. Now, that still may be beneficial for the small group, but then you're not, I just don't think we have to think small. And it's hard sometimes to keep the small church thinking larger. You want to say, no, there's a world out there. You see that microphone I'm wearing on my lapel? Do you see this microphone right here? We can talk to people outside of the building. Okay. We can minister to people around the world. Let's not give up. Let's not quit. Because if we do, that comes to an end. And sometimes the people outside of the mini church, they may benefit from the ministry of a mini church, but they may not recognize how much sacrifice has to go in for that. Like a mega church where there's $1 million coming in, they got a team, they got people hired for all kinds of positions you wouldn't even know. It's no big deal for them to put out thousands of hours of content for people around the world. It's not much of a financial sacrifice, but for a mini church to pull it off, yeah, they're looking at that monthly bill going, wait, what? Okay, how are we going to do that? So I think people in the mini church can get a mini church mindset, which is negative. The people, which typically says, hey, we're just good here. Let's not worry about anything else. And the people outside of the mini church may actually benefit greatly from the mini church ministry, but they don't perceive the financial difficulties and hardships that can be present within. I think there's a lot of things to consider there. They go on to say this. At Real Hope Community Church in Illinois, a Free Methodist congregation about 50 miles west of Chicago, the Reverend Jill Richardson said her congregation of about 20 people tries to focus on building close relationships and reaching out to the community. The church recently bought its first building, a 3-bedroom house near downtown area, which it hopes to rehab into a meeting space for worship and community events. Richardson hopes to have a community garden as well, though the project will take a while. The pastor feels like she's right where God wants her to be. Now, we won't get into the whole discussion. It's a female pastor, but okay. This is the best church I've ever been a part of, she said. Now, you know what? I think we'll say another thing about many churches. Compared to the stories that I've heard from pastors who pastored in other churches, I've had a few issues, but I've almost had very few problems. In fact, any of the problems we've ever had in this church probably is because I caused them for my own foolishness or stupidity in some cases. Or at least I didn't have as much spiritual wisdom as I could. I probably could have handled them slightly different in some cases. In some cases, just flat out my own fault, my own stupidity. But I've not had many problems. I think sometimes you have fewer issues in a smaller church. And bigger churches, I cannot be dogmatic about this because I've never experienced ministry in a bigger church, but it just seems like all the stories I hear of just utter, absolutely insanity usually takes place in bigger churches. I could be wrong. So I think there's some benefits being in a smaller church in that sense. The Millers, who met at a Maranatha campus ministry while students in the University of Wisconsin, pastored a church in Madison for years before starting Cornerstone. They moved an hour west to Spring Green, a small town that's home to Frank Lloyd Wright's estate. After feeling God's call to plant a new congregation, they hoped to build a church that had close ties to the community. After a friend died of a heart attack during a friendly game of racquetball, Derek Miller decided to become trained as an emergency medical technician and joined the town's volunteer fire department. He now serves as the ambulance chief for the department, providing emergency care for people being transported to the hospital. All right. Okay, and then they talk. Let's go through a little bit of things. Oh, now that Cornerstone Church, the first church they talked about, the new building can seat 200 people and features a large fellowship hall. That's crazy. They got and they're standing outside the building. They got a nice building for that small of people. They got like 30 people. I mean, look at. I know I'm looking at the picture. You can't. I'm looking at this picture, and I'm just like, what in the world? How do they afford that? They must have some very wealthy people. Okay. Or they're selling drugs on the side. I'm joking. That I'm just looking at that building. And I'm like, wow, that's nice. Their little sign, it's like two rocks and it says Cornerstone Church. If you see our sign, we need a new sign. We desperately need a new sign for our building. But we don't. That'd be money. Yeah. And then they go through here. Yeah. They don't say a lot more. They just go through like this pastor does this. He volunteers for this. The church does. They just go through a lot of those kinds of things. I thought they would get into a little bit more discussion about why they believe this to be the trend today. Let's see here. I'm just looking at some of the comments to see if there's anything else here that I want to share here. Of course, I knew someone was going to quote this. I knew where 2 or 3 are gathered, God is in our midst. Oh, man, I knew someone was going to quote that. I knew someone was going to quote that. Let me grab my Bible. Okay. People always say that about small churches. Okay. People, if you say, man, my church is small, it's a little discouraging. People are, well, where 2 or 3 are gathered, they always quote that. And sometimes you want to ask, what is that verse about? Let me just show you. It got dark outside all of a sudden. Okay, I know you don't care. I just looked up and looked out the window. I'm like, what's going on? Okay, Matthew chapter 16. All right, let's see here. Is it Matthew 16? Let me see here. No, not Matthew 16. Give me 1 second. Let me look it up. Okay, it'll take just a second to find it. So it'll take just a second. All right, where 2 or 3. Okay, where 2 or more are gathered. Yeah, Matthew 18. I apologize. I don't know why I was thinking it was Matthew 16. Matthew 18. I know it was Matthew. I had that right. Matthew chapter 18. All right, here we go. Matthew chapter 18. Let's put this in context. Everyone, again, you're in a small church. It'll be a Wednesday night. We may just have a few people here. And now people in my congregation now don't say this, but there was a time where 2 or 3 are together. And I'd be like, oh, okay. Could we put that in context? All right, here we go. Matthew chapter 18, verse 15. Moreover, if thy brother shall trespass against thee, go and tell him his fault between thee and him alone. If he shall hear thee, thou hast gained thy brother. But if he will not hear thee, then take with thee 2 or more, then in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if he shall neglect to hear them, tell it unto the church. But if he neglect to hear the church, let him be unto thee as a heathen man and a publican. The context here is church discipline. The context here is church discipline. You go to them in private. They don't repent, you bring 2 or 3. They don't, you bring it before the church. And if they don't repent, you treat them now as a heathen man or a publican. This is in the context of church discipline. And then it says this, verily I say unto you, whatsoever you shall bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatsoever you shall loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven. That binding and loosing is referring to church discipline. When you church discipline someone, you bind them. When you lift the church discipline, you've loosed them. Binding and loosening, that's the idea. That's what it is referring to. The binding and loosening, people use it for all kinds of weird things. It's about church discipline. All right. Then, again, I say unto you that if 2 of you shall agree on earth as touching anything that they shall ask, it shall be done for them of my Father which is in heaven. This is the church, 2 coming together in a sense in the church for church discipline, right? The binding and loosening of an individual. And then it says, for where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst of them. Where 2 or 3 are gathered together in a sense of church discipline. The context is church discipline. It's not like where 2 or 3 are gathered. He's gathered to recognize the church discipline, to recognize the binding and the loosening. It's Jesus saying, in a sense, that God is present and acknowledges the binding and loosening. He sees it. He recognizes it. That the church discipline is a binding thing, obviously, if it's done scripturally and biblically. That's the immediate context. If you want to try to apply it beyond that context, I guess you could. I mean, think about it. I mean, in some ways, it's just a ridiculous thing to say. 2 or 3, he's there. Well, on one hand, he's there because he's omnipresent. So he's present everywhere. Now you say where 2 or 3, he's present in a special way. I agree. Where 2 or 3 are gathered for church discipline, he's present in a special way in the sense that he will recognize the correctly issued church discipline, which I don't know why people always rip that out of context. But I knew someone in the comment section was going to do this, so that's why I looked at it. Let's see here if they offer any more. Another person says, this is really refreshing. Relationships over spectacle. Ministry in the hands of regular people. Why can't every church be like that? Now, I do appreciate, let me state this. I do appreciate the people who love the small church. I do appreciate that. But I hope they understand the difficulties and the sacrifice the pastor of that small church is making. Now, maybe that pastor could not get a job in a larger church, but if for a pastor to decide to serve a mini church, he's giving up the possibility of making more money, having a nicer home, getting his wife nicer things, getting his wife nicer furniture, having a nicer car. I mean, right now, my car needs new tires probably desperately. I think that when I went to get the oil change at the dealership, they basically like, if you don't replace those tires, you're going to end up on the side of the road. But that costs money, right? So there's always things. Oh, we could get this. Now we do have we have been blessed financially, praise God, because of the military and my VA disability that we do very well. But if I was getting that plus pastoring a larger church, I could have more. Now for me, my church knows you would never make it in a larger church. They would fire you because you don't do things in a traditional way. They're probably right. They're probably 1,000% right. So they may not think that way, but I just want you to know, if you're a part of a mini church, realize the pastor is sacrificing to be there. At least recognize the sacrifice, right? I'm not saying you have to make a big deal about it every day. Just realize that in some cases, he could be at a bigger church with more financial security, because it's sacrifice. Another person says, personality has replaced theology. And then they put Driscoll there. Numerical growth built on consumerism. The growth movement should be titled, How to Fill Your Church with Tares. Now, I think that's a little unfair. There's plenty of large churches that don't have tares. Now, you could argue the philosophy to gain people makes it vulnerable to bring in tares. But let me tell you, you can have tares in a big church and a small church. You can have tares anywhere. There's no sure proof to avoid that. Church health is not based on size. Jesus said a few are actually saved. He states you need to lose your life, deny yourself, and take his cross, forfeit your rights. Is that the message in church? That should be the aim. Not anti-Trump stuff. The church's call is to teach the Bible. Now, I've got to stop right here. This should be the aim, not anti-Trump stuff. Let me add, that should be the aim, not pro-Trump stuff. Right? Like, why does the person only mention anti-Trump stuff? Okay, right. Hey, the church, you can't be anti-Trump. Well, you shouldn't be pro-Trump either. You shouldn't be pro any politician, all right? The church's call is to teach the Bible. It is wrong to platform candidates and oppose a candidate in church. The racial issue was paid for at the cross. There is diversity in the church. Even more beautiful is that Christ indwells all races and makes all a new person in Christ, a new race. Those who have Abraham's faith, the distinction is gone and Christ is on display. And Bob, I don't know how to say the last name's article, he platforms anti-Trump individuals. What is this person concerned with anti-Trump? Anti-Trump. All right. So this person doesn't want the church to be anti-Trump. He says they may impact perspectives on the election. God is sovereign and he has ordained Biden as president. Praise God. Having read several articles with an anti-Trump narrative, it creates news. Not sure how it reports the truth or restores the church. His statement, if anything, it breeds more division. So obviously the person who wrote this article, he doesn't seem to be a fan of it. Okay, that's all right. Another person, though, interesting enough, takes a different approach. Unfortunately, the adoration of Trump within a large section of the evangelical community, which is in some cases has encroached on deification, has made it impossible to ignore the elephant in the room over the last half decade. What I think is interesting is again, you see the political issues in the church. Oh, if they're anti-Trump, I don't want to go to that church. If they're pro-Trump, I don't want to go to that church. Look, I think if they're pro or anti and they've become politically hijacked, don't go to the church. I don't care which political party they've fallen in love with. Find a church that's a church, all right? Fortunately, this site is not an echo chamber to complain when a small part of the coverage of the evangelical community gives voice to those who are not in lockstep with this overall political movement is merely an effort to drown out voices that dissent from yours. That person is responding to the previous person. All right, and then there's a couple more comments here that we could read, but I won't go into all of that. I'll just try to wrap it up with a couple of thoughts. Here's a couple of thoughts. Number one, the health of a church cannot be determined by the number of people who attend. That is just a fact. The health of a church cannot be determined by the number of people who attend. Yet people will say they will say amen to that and then immediately look down on churches that are small or at least question, well, why isn't God moving there? Well, God's not obviously doing anything there. God is, and we got to get rid of viewing things by numbers. We got to get rid of that mindset. All right. So that's number one. The health of a church is not determined by numbers. Okay. Number two, and I'm not going to remember that I didn't write these down. These are just in my head. So if I don't remember them correctly, but number one, the health of a church is not determined by numbers. Number two, you cannot keep yourself from going to a church just because it makes you feel embarrassed because it's so small and seemingly so insignificant. And it may seem foolish or embarrassing from the world's perspective. If you feel yourself, deep down you wouldn't want people to know you go there. You wouldn't post pictures on your social media because you would be embarrassed by it. If you're judging a church based off those feelings, you've got a spiritual problem. You've got a spiritual problem. People who go to beautiful churches, they'll post that all over social media. People who go to small, little, insignificant churches, I think, are far less likely to do so because it makes them, they just know it makes them look foolish. We can't judge churches based off its looks, based off how nice the building is. You can't do that. Now, listen, there's a little bit of that in me. There's a little bit of that in me. And when someone pulls up in my church, I'm like, oh man, I wonder what they're thinking. Oh man, Now I'm not saying we shouldn't take care of the building, try to make it look as nice as we could. We should always do what we can, but we can't allow that to stop. We can't allow that to impact us. We can't. You can't keep. I got two choices here. That church, I like that building much better. I'm going to go there. You don't choose a church based off the building or the looks. You choose a church based off the teaching. Right? So we don't determine the health of a church by the numbers. Large church doesn't mean bad. Small church doesn't mean good. Okay. Small church doesn't mean bad. All right. And large church doesn't necessarily mean good. I mean, whichever way you look at it, bad church doesn't equal bad. Small church doesn't equal good. Small church doesn't equal bad. Big church doesn't equal good. Whichever way. I don't know if I'm saying those correctly, but you get the idea, all right? Another way, you don't base it off the numbers, and you can't keep yourself from choosing churches based off the how it looks. That's something about your ego. That's something about your pride. That cannot be about that, all right? And then number 3, I have to stress this, and I know this is self-serving, but you've got to understand, small churches, if you benefit from the ministry of a small church, you need to do what you can to help support it, or it will not be around. It's that simple. It's that simple. And members of small churches, you got to show up. You got to be there. You've got to. You have to be there as much as you possibly can. You got to show that commitment. And I know I feel bad for people in small churches, because if we went to a large church, that don't show up, no big deal, right? Nobody probably will even notice. But in a small church, it can be devastating. It may even not, a service may not even happen because there's not enough people. And the pastor stands there going, what am I doing? Why am I even trying? Well, what's the point? So there's a lot of pressure on small churches, financially, attendance. So do what you can to support. If a small church is ministering to you, I'm not just speaking of me. There's thousands of small churches out there. Large, obviously now the majority of churches are very small. If they're ministering to you, find a way to support them. And whichever way you can, even if it's a small financial gift, even sometimes it can just be an email. Sometimes it can just be in participating, watching the live stream when you can, listening to a live broadcast, emailing, commenting. Those things are just as important. Praying for them, praying for their survival, praying that they will be around next week. Okay, that's beneficial as well, because I think that's very important. And just do remember that I think it's important for a pastor of a small church. They are financially sacrificing. They are. Okay. It's like someone saying, okay, I can be in this job and make $10 an hour, but I could go over there and make $40 an hour. But you know what? I'm going to stay here in this job for $10 an hour because I believe that I'm being able to be a good, think of it this way. Forget ministry. Think of it from this perspective. You work in a job, right? And see the last time you've thought this way. Now, I'm not saying you should think this way, but I'm just saying that this probably never crosses your mind. You work in a job, let's say you're making $10 an hour, right? And you're just barely getting by. And you find out that you could go down the street and start making $40 an hour. Do you ever stop and go, but wait a minute here. I'm here. I'm supposed to be a light and salt to these people. I'm supposed to be ministering to these people. Yes, I'm here to work, but remember, as a Christian, you're called to ministry, right? Every Christian is a minister. The reason you come to church is to be equipped for ministry. I've never heard a lot of people contact me and go, hey, I'm thinking about getting another job, but I really think that, I'm being able to be a good influence and I'm ministering to people here. And I don't want to give that. No, they're like, I can make more money and take care of my family. Peace out. Okay, I'm gone. I'm going to go make more money. Well, when a pastor stays in a small church, he's giving up the opportunity to make more money. I mean, that can't just be ignored, all right? That can't be ignored. Now, the pastor should have a more ministerial mind than the people in the congregation. He should be like, no, I need to be here to minister to people. And of course, I have a very strict rule that I don't think a pastor should ever leave a church until a replacement is found. I've never understood it. And all kinds of jobs. You put in your notice. In many cases, they want you to stick around until you can train your replacement. But in ministry, they're like, peace out, gone. Now you go find a pastor. And then the congregation is left without a shepherd, without an under shepherd, without a human shepherd. And then many cases the churches can completely disintegrate and fall into church split. I'm like, why did you leave the church before a replacement was found? Help your church find the replacement. Then find the replacement, then move on. Like, I don't know why that can't be better utilized. But it's almost like peace out, gone. And then the other pastor moves on. And then that church, I've watched it happen too many times. The churches implode after the pastor packs up and leaves, and typically to go to a bigger church. Now, you can't condemn them in some ways for going to a bigger church because they've got to make a living too, right? Especially if they got kids. And there's just things you can't get because you're a pastor of a small church. So I think the congregation has to at least to remember that. They can't forget that. They can't forget that. Now, again, in my case, my church doesn't have to remember that because we all know. I wouldn't make it in a large church in 5 seconds. We all know that. In some ways, I feel like a failure because of that, because I should be able to go to a large church and be able to be successful. But I minister in such a way that I ask too many questions. I question things. No, it would never fly. And I understand that. So that's my own fault. That's nobody else's fault. So my congregation doesn't have to worry about that. They can't say, well, he's sacrificing. No, they'd be like, he can't go anywhere else. He's pathetic. All right. So yeah, I agree. But and for other pastors in small churches, at least remember, for people who attend small churches, remember that they are sacrificing in some way, shape, or form. Now, they may only sacrifice temporarily and then move and leave you. And see, when the congregation doesn't remember and appreciate and honor the sacrifice, that bothers me. But when the pastor just packs up and bails on that small church to go to a bigger church, that bothers me as well. There should be a godly way of handling it from both sides, the pastor side and the congregation's side. But I don't know if the mini church is the future. I will say this. I think church attendance will continue to decline. And I think churches will get smaller and smaller. And it's going to be more and more difficult to maintain a lot of these large churches. And I'm really starting to think that we're going to slowly but surely see the apostasy of churches all around us. And I think, I could be wrong here, I think theologically, biblically, I think where we're going to see, look, if we understand that in the last days, that when you get into 1 Timothy and 2 Timothy, when it describes what's going on, that men are going to be lovers of themselves and all disobedient to parents and all of those things, that's describing what's going on in the church. If that's a correct understanding, then as we get closer to the last day, the church is going to become absolutely corrupt and apostate. So I think we may be moving into a period where true spiritual growth happens. It's going to happen outside of most churches. True, quote-unquote, spiritual revival, renewal. I'm not saying some massive revival, but any kind of revival, renewal, and spiritual growth, in many cases, is going to occur outside of the church. I don't know exactly how that plays out in my eschatology, but I think that's where we're headed. I think the church is going to get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and denominations are going to fall and fall. I think denominations all over the place are going to major denominations are going to compromise until many people are going to find it difficult to be associated with those denominations. And the more independent churches, I think in many cases, are going to grow smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And so it's going to require the people who are faithful to be truly faithful and commit and dedicate and support, or you're not going to have anything. So I think it's going to be like, what are you really going to support with your time, your focus, and your treasure? I think there's going to be a lot of questions asked there. But there you go. I was hoping they would do a little bit more. Like, I think it's almost, they're saying this is a trend. They got one person quoted that it's the future. I wish they would have given us some indication of where they think it's going. They kind of just gave us a picture of where we are. But I think this is definitely the trend for the near future is getting smaller. And I think where you're going to see the major quote unquote revivals and large growth inside the church are going to be churches that are either so politically and theologically compromised that that's not true spiritual growth. It's actually going to be an abomination. I really do believe that. But all right, we'll stop right there. You can email me, newsif@yahoo.com, newsif@yahoo.com. That's newsif@yahoo.com. We didn't accomplish a lot today, but hopefully we accomplished something and gave you something to think about. Thank you as always for listening. Everyone have a great day. God bless.